Welcome to Disconnected. This is an interview by Jacob Rees-Mogg on gbnews, interviewing Just Stop Oil's Phoebe Plummer. I've already watched this. I think this is a really good debate, and I actually find that this is probably the only time I've ever listened to Jacob Rees-Mogg and not wanted to, lose the plot. However, I still think he's 100%. Well, no, let's be fair. I think he's about 10 to 20% right on some of the things he questions, but I don't think that it is a case of right or wrong. It more has to do with a case of there are a few things that are not taken into account. So let's watch this.
But I'm really delighted to be joined by Just Stop Oil spokesman Phoebe Plummer. Thank you for coming in, because I know you don't agree with me. How do you square the circle that people want to be more prosperous, they want to lead comfortable lives, but you're saying it's absolutely urgent we stop emissions now? How do you make the two work?
Hi, Jacob. Thank you so much for having me on. As you say, I'm Phoebe. I'm 21 and I'm a student from London and a supporter of Just Stop Oil. And I wonder why you think it's incompatible to help people with the cost of living crisis and to switch to renewables, which are 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels. Can you name me one of your viewers who is suffering the consequences of the cost of living crisis, who doesn't want their energy bills to be 9 times cheaper right now?
Well, unfortunately, that's not what's happening, because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, and you need to have fossil fuel backup to make up the gap. About half our energy every day is still coming from natural gas. Where's that going to come from?
Well, why aren't we implementing renewable technology?
So I'll get into that, because this is not entirely true. If you go to places like Scotland, it's a good example. There are many days, more days than not now, where 100% of the electricity is provided by renewable means, a mix of renewable means, wind farms and hydro stations, for example. And we also have nuclear. So personally, I'm going to add nuclear to the mix of renewable, because nuclear is the safest and the cleanest. And if you don't believe me, there are some really good videos and studies about it. And the reason nuclear is clean and safe is because it is the cheapest to provide. It creates the least amount of harmful things. Now, to be fair, what the harmful things that it does produce is really harmful and obviously needs to be really well taken care of. But overall, there's even an argument of how many lives it saved. I'm going down a line which I don't want to take, but the only thing I wanted to say here is nuclear should be part of the mix, in my personal opinion, because according to all studies, it's basically one of the cheapest and the most the safest, in the sense of how many people die as a result of using it. What we have to remember is burning coal or gas creates pollution, and that pollution kills, and it kills millions of people, and has done for many years, pretty much as long as we've been using it. And so if you've taken all the factors, nuclear, and obviously all the renewables that are possible, including things that are still to be invented and used. So this idea that we absolutely need coal or gas to supplement isn't necessarily true, even by long shot. Now, the way I see it is, like, to be more pragmatic about it, is if you are a country like Scotland and it's constantly raining and it's constantly windy, then you have that opportunity to really capitalize on that, to make so much of your energy due to geological weather processes. If you're in a country that does not have necessarily the ability to create a lot of renewable energy, then you can't. Then you might have to go down the route of coal, gas, but preferably something like nuclear. But it is exactly because every country and every region is different in what it can produce through renewable means, that the ones that can capitalize on that as much as possible. Capitalize is not the right word. Kind of like really go for it, because it means that you can offset that other countries can't do through renewables, or at least attempt to. I think that would be a nice equal way for the world to work, where different countries do whatever they can to get as green as possible, and some just can't, maybe financially, maybe just geological, where they are geographically, and they might not have that much sun or that much wind or that much wave or whatever, or they might not have nuclear technology, who knows. But the point is that those that can, those developed countries that can, and remember that most developed countries are to blame for the majority of the CO2 emissions over the last 150 years, because they were developed countries. So you could argue that, considering they made the most mess, it is also to a degree their responsibility to take up some of the slack that now needs to be taken up.
The largest solar farm in the UK was built in 6 weeks.
But it
takes up to 28 years for any oil to come out of the ground in the North Sea.
But it's not going to produce any energy at night. That's the problem with renewables, is that they don't provide.
This argument happens all the time. What happens if the sun don't shine at night, or if the wind doesn't blow? Well, obviously, that is a known fact, and that is why you do have to have that mix. But there's no reason to make that mix or that shortfall and use fossil fuel. We do have fossil fuel that can still be used, and but there are other methods too. I mean, the wind doesn't stop blowing at night. That's the point of a mix of energy resources, is that you have a mix that you can swap in between or supplement with, and then if you have some additional nuclear or whatever new technology comes down the line, it is not necessary to say, well, because the sun doesn't shine at night, we still have to dig up oil.
The base load that you need.
We already have the capacity to provide so much of our energy from renewables without any technology needed for storage solutions.
But where is this coming from? Because when the wind doesn't blow, when we had really cold days, we were reliant on importing from the EU, on coal and on gas. How are we going to replace that in the short term?
Quite frankly, I'm not a scientist. What I am doing is listening to what all the experts are saying. We're living in this insane world where the experts aren't being listened to. The United Nations has called for no more oil and gas. The International Energy Agency has said we can have no new oil and gas. The IPCC report, the largest global report on the climate crisis, have all said we can have no new oil and gas. How many more experts need to say it?
Because we can't do it tomorrow. What are we going to do in terms of transport? That we still need petrol for cars and we need diesel for lorries. How are we going to get goods into supermarkets without this?
Quite frankly, I'm not a scientist. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the world, and we're living the...
And I think that's where... the way these two communicate with each other, I think, is fairly okay. I mean, she gets a little bit excited, which is always a problem, because the moment you get a little bit excited, then, especially those that want to demonize you are going to call you like a weirdo or something like that, when you're basically just being passionate. But here is the logical, in my opinion, the logical kind of way this can go down. The more, if you can get rid of all of the, if you can make most of your energy supply by renewables, it means that those few things that still rely on fossil fuel is reduced, and thereby the problem of fossil fuel becomes less and less and less. And because we do have a certain amount of fossil fuel reserves that are still being, it's not like if you don't explore new fields, that you don't have enough to run that very minimal set of, let's say, vehicles or planes or whatever on fossil fuel. The whole point of this, in my opinion, is that, and I don't want to say they're talking past each other or that Just Stop Oil is going overboard, because I kind of agree with organizations like Just Stop Oil being overzealous, because the other side is also like completely stationary. They're not moving either. So you need the balance will come in between the two extremes, and hopefully that is the right balance that happens then in between. So what I'm getting at here is like I'm all for them going nuts and going crazy and wanting too much, because it means that, because if they overreach, at least something will happen, in my opinion, the way I see things going down usually. So the more you can take away from fossil fuel, the better, because it means that the truck that still has to deliver stuff that can't be electrified tomorrow, or the car that can't be electrified tomorrow in mass, at least there's a massive reduction in the use of fossil fuel.
The effects of the climate crisis today. Right now, people are dying. Children are starving. Families are fleeing their homes.
But energy...
And it's preventable. We have the solutions.
Cheap energy is one of the things that has hugely extended life expectancy by the ability to control temperatures, whether this is by air conditioning or by heating, the ability to store food more effectively, the ability to transport food, and indeed use fertilisers to grow more food, has all been essential in increasing life expectancy. Taking all that away would be disastrous for life expectancy.
Do you know what's essential in keeping our food supply, tackling the climate crisis? This year we lost a third of our wheat crops, half of our potato crops, and it's only going to get worse. We're heading to a future where people are going to be fighting over the last loaves of bread at Lidl.
But the only way we get our wheat crop is by putting the fertilisers on.
That is true, but only because of the methods that we use. There are many farms that experiment with the old ways of doing things, essentially, and obviously they weren't as productive. But there's another factor that comes into play here. That is that as a Western society, we throw away 40% of our food. That means that we produce so much just to throw 40% of it away. So you could argue that even with a reduced yield, you can still feed everybody if everybody also looks after what they buy and what they eat and how they treat the food that they buy. So, and that doesn't need to have anything to do with cost. So there's quite a few interesting programs which show farmers who, I don't want to say organically grow stuff, but essentially using the land in very kind of traditional ways, in the sense that, you know, you put some sheep on there, and then the next year you put some crop on there, and then the next year you put some cattle on there, and then you put some pigs on there, and then you grow some stuff again, and you kind of constantly circulate the ground, and you keep the soil really healthy and rich, and it produces therefore really good quality produce. Maybe not as much as intensive farming, but it produces really good quality food. And that's another thing. We don't have to eat that much. We have to eat healthy and well and nutritious, but we don't have to eat as much as we do. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done to circumvent this argument that we need, you know, what is it, ammonium nitrate or whatever they chuck on the fields. And the only reason they have to do that, people have to remember this, is because they've so overworked the soil that the soil is completely depleted. And again, there are really good studies and informative videos which explain how insanely bad the soil is becoming, and especially countries like America, where the farming has completely, and it's not the farming itself, it's the methods that they use to farm, this pushing for yield every day, that has completely and utterly depleted the soil. And that's why we have the Dust Bowl. That's why we had, you know, the crops failures in the early 30s. And it goes on and on and on. But if you actually use the land properly as it is intended to work with the land, that is not necessarily a problem. I am sure that it reduces yield, but if you take into account the amount of food that we waste, the overconsumption that is not necessary, and that it is more about the quality of the food than it is necessarily about the quantity, this is an argument that could be challenged in that way.
that come from fossil fuels. How are we going to replace that? That the productivity of organic farming is so much lower than of modern farming methods. We cannot feed the world on organic farming, and you must know that.
How do you expect to feed the world when our crops are destroyed by droughts, floods, wildfires, storms?
You've always had weather events that have affected crops, but that actually using fossil fuels for fertilizers and moving on to genetic modification of crops has enormously increased the yield. That since Malthus rate, we've increased agricultural productivity by about 2% per annum. And this is what is allowing people to get extended life expectancy because they've got more certainty of food. And this all depends on cheap energy, which has come from fossil fuels.
Jacob, you have 6 children. Do you not care about their future? Do you not care about them being able to feed themselves? Because right now, under this government's policies, your 6 children...
So he asks a very relative question and she goes down the, oh, don't you love your kids? Which is unfortunately the wrong argument here. Although it's a completely valid argument, but not in the sense, because he asks...
on cheap energy, which has come from fossil fuels.
Jacob, you...
The cheap energy has come from fossil fuels, but that cheap energy has also cost us a lot. It's costing us the environment. It's also costing us health issues from the pollution, which is extensive. So that would have been probably a better answer here at this moment in time. Not that her question is in any way irrelevant, because what she's suggesting is 100% true. It's like, I know I'm worrying about tomorrow's economy, but nobody worries about our kids and their grandkids, and their kids and their grandkids, etc., etc. We're too focused on the near future rather than long-term longevity.
You have 6 children. Do you not care about their future? Do you not care about them being able to feed themselves? Because right now, under this government's policies, your 6 children are heading towards a future that is filled with life-threatening extreme weather events, crop failures, famine, war. Suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
I think you've taken the evidence for an evolving climate and then applied it in an extraordinarily extreme way and are forgetting about the enormous advantages.
I can't believe you're talking to me about an evolving climate.
Well, the climate is...
People are dying.
But this is
Do you know how many people are suffering around the world?
What evidence is there that this is because we're using fossil fuels?
I don't understand that in March 2023, you still have people going, what evidence is there? So let's just, if you just look at the scientific evidence, which is universal, like there's hardly any scientist who goes and disagrees with us, right? That human intervention is causing this rapid climate change. Yes, we know that climate changes over long periods of time by itself through natural processes. But the problem is that we and our usage of fossil fuel and our way of life and our Western economies has accelerated this to such a degree that it is going a little bit out of control. The other question I have to ask to anybody who denies climate change and that our impact is not part of the problem is this is a very simple thought experiment or logic problem. Okay, so you have natural processes which obviously cause climate change. You have volcanoes going off, you have all sorts of stuff happening, which essentially puts crap into the air. Okay, now on top of that, you add the mass burning of fossil fuels. So you can't figure out logically that this is a problem. That the amount of fossil fuels that we are burning on a daily basis, added to the natural kind of way of things of this planet, that is not obviously throwing us out of balance, because the climate is a balance. The world is a balance. Everything is a balance, and it sits within its balance. And the moment you throw it out of balance, it goes lopsided. So just purely from a logical point of view, if you have all your geological and environmental natural processes happening that slowly causes changes in our environment, changes in our weather, And you add to that the absolute insane amount of pollution and CO2 and all these other things that is a result of burning fossil fuels, that is not going to have an impact. It is the most insane thing that people still go and say, it is not because of us, it's just how naturally things are. And even if it is just a purely natural thing, if we can drive that natural process down or slow it down for our own survival, would also be an argument to go down the route of what climate protesters are suggesting. So in both ways, it is just the weirdest thing why people still say this. They don't believe in climate change, or at least they don't believe that it is human cause. And more importantly, even if it wasn't, we still have to do something about it. It is the most crazy, fucking illogical way of thinking that I've ever. I just don't get it.
The climate evolves, but more people die each year from cold than from heat, as you know.
Have you read the IPCC report? What do you mean? What science?
But in terms, you're making extreme claims, but you're suggesting by not using fossil fuels, we would not produce the food we need to feed the world population.
I'm suggesting that if we keep on heading down this genocidal path of mass destruction, then no, there won't be any foods in the supermarket. Then we will see vast swathes of the world uninhabitable. We will see mass displacement of people.
But if you took out fossil fuels tomorrow, you would simply not have the productivity of agriculture you need to feed 8 or 9 billion people. And that would be tomorrow. And I'm not saying you shouldn't reduce emissions. I'm not arguing that. I'm simply saying you must do it when you have the technology to replace the energy that you're using. Because otherwise, all the consequences you're arguing for will happen immediately. We will simply not have the food we need to feed the population of the world.
Jacob, you know we're not asking for the taps to be turned off tomorrow. All of you know that. We're asking for an end to all new fossil fuel licenses, in line with what climate scientists around the world are saying.
But if you turn it off for new licenses now, you're requiring a change that is going to happen before we have the technology in place to substitute for it.
Yeah, I
so
don't
you
believe
may be
that's
delaying
true
it
at
by
all.
a few years, but this has
That's
to be
just
a
about
rational
political
process
and
to do
economic
it
will.
once you've got the technology sorted out, and we haven't got the technology yet.
So I understand you're an economics man, yes? So
Well, I'm interested in economics.
yeah, so I've done some maths for you. I hope you don't mind. I looked up your net worth online. It's quite easy to find.
Which is not actually true. It's easy to find, but it's
In
not
the
actually true.
hundreds of millions.
But that's not...
It costs around £20,000 to insulate a British home. So that's 8,000 British homes for your 150 net million, which is what it says online.
Which is untrue. But
do you really think that you're worth more than 8,000 cold, freezing families?
Have you seen the studies on insulation? That insulation...
Do you care about the people living in fuel poverty?
Very much so. When I was Secretary of State for Energy, I was responsible for developing the plan that has brought energy prices down for families. That was policy that I was intimately involved in designing, so of course I care about that.
So you do understand the report that you're asking me about says that the cost of insulating British homes is so expensive because of the government's failure to insulate British homes.
But what happens 3 years after people have insulated their homes? They use the same amount of energy as they did before. There's been a study on this, which I'm sure you've seen reports on. In the first year, they save money. In the second year, they save a small amount of money. In the third year, they have actually made themselves warmer because the economics of it is they have a certain amount they can spend on energy.
What happens when the government fails to insulate British homes? 7.5 million British people live in fuel poverty. Parents are starving themselves so that they can feed their children, and people are freezing to death in their homes because they are forced to choose between heating and eating. People are dying. Are you hearing me?
Because it's simply not true. The government introduced a cap on energy prices and support for families who couldn't afford energy prices.
Can you even listen to that line without going, are you fucking kidding me, dude? Right, so... yeah, they put caps on, but the caps are so high that it's still unaffordable for people. We're still paying, 2 or 3 times generally now for electricity and gas over what it was before, like a year or a year and a half ago, and at the same time, that was already expensive. So yeah, they put caps on. It looks wonderfully politically because you can say it, but actually when you look at it, it means absolutely nothing. More importantly, we know that what we pay for our energy is not the price that that energy costs. We are are paying market prices, which are governed by the market, so they don't reflect the actual cost of that. They reflect inflated, profit-hungry prices. That's what we're paying for electricity and our gas. It costs much less to get that gas out, and the wholesale and all of that. Not the wholesale, I'm sorry. What I mean by that is that we don't need to pay that amount. We pay that because of Wall Street, because of international markets, because of wangling, because of political decisions. If we were in control and in charge, if the country, if it was in public hands, we would not be paying these prices. And we would be able to make these decisions around, which way do we want to go with our energy. So this is this is a classic Jacob Rees-Mogg thing to say, look, I helped with energy prices, blah, blah, blah. No, you didn't. If you really wanted to do something about energy prices, you would take it into public hands, and you would reduce the price to that where the cost is paid for, plus maybe a little bit of profit, but not these insane prices that we pay now. And if you then include even if you force these guys to take their profits and invest it into renewable energies, even that would still be acceptable in my opinion. But you're not doing that.
Prices that those were brought in last year, and they are very significant supports.
What do you mean it's not true? Have you spoken to an ordinary person who is suffering the cost of living crisis right now?
I don't believe there's any such thing as ordinary people. I believe everybody is in their individual way quite remarkable.
Oh my God. We know exactly, I hate it when people do that. We know exactly what she meant by ordinary people. She means the everyday, everyone, right? The normal people who go out every day, and he's trying to make that out as if she means something, diminutive about it. I hate that way of arguing.
I think ordinary people is the most condescending way of referring to our fellow British citizens.
Well, of course you don't relate to the ordinary people. You're a millionaire.
The figures, my personal circumstances, are nothing to do with whether we impoverish people by making energy prices.
It has everything to do with it, because you have no idea what it feels like to not know exactly how you're going to pay for your electricity or your food or your shopping, even though you might work your 8 hours a day. You have no idea and no empathy. You come from a background where it is impossible for you to put yourself in that circumstance. So you might, worry or think about people who are poorer, but you can never properly empathize because you absolutely have no idea.
Is higher, and you want to make them higher, and I don't. But what I'd say to you finally is, why don't you stand for election? Why do you think it is right to throw soup over a picture rather than standing election and seeing if you can get people to vote for your view of the world?
You're an educated man, Jacob. You know that this is how successful movements of social change happen. They must cause disruption. And Antonio Gutierrez, he's the Secretary General.
It is 100% true. Every single right that has ever been won from the ruling elite has been done by going absolutely insane and breaking down the system. It is from women's rights to voting rights to workers' rights, you name it. It has all been done through protest. Not by going into politics and becoming an MP and telling your constituency what you believe in and ending up in Westminster, making the odd speech during Prime Minister's question time. That's not how things are done.
Of the United Nations, he has said that we are on a highway to climate hell. He has said that licensing new fossil fuels is economic and moral madness. The Secretary General of the United Nations is calling for an end to all new fossil fuels. What makes you think that I have time to get into power and make these changes?
So you want to be a dictator? You don't want voters to decide?
Again, what a out of the air taken comment to try and make her look bad. Why? How did he come to that conclusion to ask her that question? They are certain. Well, okay, let's put it this way. Personally, I think that there are certain things that the general public just don't have enough interest in on a daily basis, and therefore, what's the point asking them, really? Because they don't really care. I mean, if everybody really knew what was going on and actually believed the science behind this, then every single person would be voting for the Green Party, right? But they don't. They vote for the Tories and they vote for Labour, which is a pretty clear indication to me personally, at least, that they don't really pay attention to all the different bigger picture things. Okay, so you could argue that, well, maybe there are certain things where the people that really know what's happening have to make certain decisions. And I don't necessarily see that it is obviously undemocratic, but it seems to be like a necessity sometimes. But that's not what she's doing. I mean, they're just protesting, say, hey, we don't want fucking more fuel. And it doesn't have any necessarily any real impact on the everyday person if we move over very fast towards renewable energy, because firstly it's in our benefit, secondly it's going to create jobs, it's going to create cheaper energy prices, and we have to change the way we live anyway to a certain degree to accommodate our environment. So why bring this up?
That's absolutely not what I said, and you know
why don't you stand for election? Put yourself forward and see if people want your way.
Because we don't have time. Because if I want to have a future, if I want to have a future where I can feed myself, where I can love my family,
we're not going to feed them. We're not going to feed them without fossil fuels, which are the essential fertilizers. Thank you for coming.
They're only the essential fertilizers because of the way that we farm, and that is one of the biggest problems. Anyway, I thought this was actually a kick-ass conversation. If I was in front of Rees-Mogg, I wouldn't have been able to talk like this, like she did. I would just get so angry because I really dislike the man. I think that he's the epitome of every problem that the UK has. To me, he's like the poster boy of the Tories and the Tories mindset. And I absolutely congratulate Phoebe Plummer for being able to keep her cool as much as she did, even though she didn't obviously keep her cool entirely. But completely understandable. This was a good one. Thank you very much. Comments down below. Thank you very much.